Imagine you discovered a mountain of pure silver. Not a mine, but a literal mountain. You think you've just become the richest person in human history. You think you can buy every army, build every palace, and feed every mouth on earth. You think you've conquered scarcity itself. But you're wrong. You've just triggered a financial apocalypse. In the 16th century, Spain did exactly this. They found Potosi, a mountain in the Andes that bled silver. They flooded the world with more precious metal than the human race had seen in the previous 5,000 years combined. They expected to become gods. Instead, they became the victims of the world's first global inflation crisis. This is the story of the price revolution. It's a story about why more money doesn't mean more wealth. It's the blueprint of the modern debt trap, and it explains why the $34 trillion in U.S. debt today is a ghost that Spain met 500 years ago. This is how the greatest fortune in history destroyed the empire that found it. In 1545, a local scout in what is now Bolivia stumbled upon a secret that would reshape the planet: Cerro Rico, the rich hill. It was the single largest deposit of silver in human history. To the Spanish crown, this wasn't just a discovery, it was divine intervention. At the time, Spain was fighting wars on every front. They were the defenders of the faith, the conquerors of the New World, and the masters of Europe. But wars cost money, real money, gold and silver. Before Potosi, the Spanish treasury was perpetually empty. After Potosi, the silver arrived in fleets, massive galleons carrying thousands of tons of Real de Ocho, the Spanish dollar. For the first time in history, a single nation had an infinite money glitch. But as any economist today will tell you, there is no such thing as a free lunch. To extract that silver, Spain built a system of forced labor that cost millions of lives. But the real death blow wasn't the labor, it was the quantity theory of money. Spain believed that silver was wealth, but wealth is actually the goods and services a society produces: the bread, the steel, the houses. When you 10 times the amount of money, but the amount of bread stays the same, the bread doesn't stay cheap. The bread becomes 10 times more expensive. Spain didn't get richer, they just made everything on earth more expensive. As the silver fleets docked in Seville, something strange happened. Prices began to creep up, then they began to sprint. A loaf of bread that cost a copper coin in 1500 cost 5 times that by 1600. This was the price revolution. The Spanish elite didn't understand what was happening. They thought it was greed. They thought it was the merchants. They didn't realize that by flooding the market with silver, they were devaluing the very thing they were using to measure value. But it got worse. Because Spain had free money coming from the Americas, they stopped producing things at home. Why build a factory or farm the land when you can just buy everything from your neighbors with New World silver? Spain's domestic economy withered away. They became a nation of consumers, not producers. This is the Dutch disease, or the resource curse. When a country finds a massive resource, like oil or silver, it often destroys its other industries. Spain was the 16th century version of a lottery winner who spends it all on luxury cars while their house rots. They were importing everything from England, France, and the Netherlands. Essentially, Spain was subsidizing the industrial growth of its future enemies with its own silver. This is the part that sounds eerily like 2026. Because the silver was guaranteed to arrive every year, the Spanish kings, Charles V and later Philip II, began to borrow against future shipments. They went to the bankers in Genoa and Germany and said, "Give us gold now, and we will pay you in silver when the fleet arrives." They used this borrowed money to fund endless wars. They fought the Ottomans, the French, the Dutch, and the English. They built the Spanish Armada. But the interest on their debt began to grow faster than the silver coming out of the mountain. In 1557, Philip II did the unthinkable. He sat in his palace and realized that even with all the silver in the world, he couldn't pay his bills. He declared sovereign bankruptcy. The richest man in the world had officially defaulted, and he would do it again in 1560, 1575, and 1596. Spain was trapped in a debt spiral. They were printing, or in this case, mining, to pay the interest on the debt they took to mine more. It was a snake eating its own tail. The silver wasn't a blessing. It was a high-interest loan from the future that Spain could never repay. Because here's what makes this story darker. The collapse didn't come from a lack of silver. It came from too much of it. Every year, fleets arrived in Seville carrying tons of silver from Potosi. On paper, Spain was getting richer. In reality, its currency was being diluted. This is what economists later called the price revolution. Prices across Europe didn't double. They didn't triple. They increased 4 to 6 times over the century. Food became expensive. Wages didn't keep up. Local industries collapsed because imported goods were cheaper than producing anything domestically. Spain stopped being a productive economy and became a financial pipeline. Silver came in from the New World and flowed straight out to pay debts in Genoa, Antwerp, and Augsburg. The empire wasn't accumulating wealth, it was passing it through. By the 17th century, the silver began to run dry. The mountain of death was exhausted, but the prices, they stayed high. The debt, it remained. Spain was left with a hollowed-out economy, a decimated population, and a mountain of useless paper contracts. They had spent a century as the world's superpower, but they had built nothing sustainable. They had lived on the subscription plan of American silver, and when the subscription ended, the empire collapsed. Wealth is not what you have in your vault. Wealth is what you can produce. Spain had the most money in history, but they had the weakest economy. Today we look at the US dollar, the global reserve currency. We look at the trillions printed during the last few years. We look at the skyrocketing prices of assets. Are we living through a modern price revolution? Is the US dollar just the 21st century version of Spanish silver? History tells us that when a nation stops producing and starts merely printing or mining its way to prosperity, the end is always the same. Prepare accordingly.